Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. The theme for our webinar today is Institutional Support and Capacity Strengthening for African Higher Education Institutions in Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic. My name is Krista Sampson, and I work as the Research and Communications Officer at ESSA. And today's webinar is a joint webinar between ESSA, which is Education Sub-Saharan Africa, and PASGR, Partnership for African Social and Governance Research. So I will hand over now to Lucy Heddy, Dr. Lucy Heddy, who is the CEO of ESSA, for her to give the welcome address and setting the scene. Over to you, Lucy. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Krista. So hello and welcome to this, the third webinar hosted by PASGR in collaboration with ESSA. My name is Lucy Heddy. I am the CEO of ESSA, and it's my real pleasure to introduce the next in a series of webinars aiming to understand how the COVID-19 pandemic affected higher education institutions in sub-Saharan Africa. This series has been highlighting insights from work undertaken by both PASGR and ESSA alongside their partners, enabling a conversation driven by evidence. These webinars have been bringing together policymakers, educators, and researchers to discuss how lessons learned from the pandemic can be used to strengthen higher education in Africa as we move into the future. At ESSA, we are all about connecting evidence and data from Africa with those who have the power to make a difference. And so what I find particularly exciting about this webinar series is how it brings together evidence from research with the direct experience of educators during the pandemic. Talking through this connection between theory and reality is really a necessary precursor to change. And so I'm so grateful for our speakers today who've taken the time out of their busy schedules to contribute to this conversation. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Mr. Edwin Rwingi from PASGR and Professor Eunice Kamara from Moi University. They'll be giving the main presentation, drawing on their work on the innovative PEDAL programme, and also Professor Wanjira Kanuthia, Professor Natasha Holzhausen, and Professor Samuel Amponsa, who will respond in a conversation moderated by Dr. Pauline Esser. But I also particularly want to welcome all of you, to everyone who's joined us here today to take part in the conversation. Please do note down questions during the presentation and the panel, as there will be plenty of time for Q&A afterwards. And I'd also like to challenge you to make the most of the next 2 hours. And by the end, I want you to think, based on the evidence and the conversations presented here today, what is the one thing that you will change in your practice going forward? Thank you, and back to you, Krista.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Next on the program, like Lucy mentioned, we do have Edwin and Eunice who will be presenting to us on the research that they had done. That is the anchor of this entire webinar. The title of their presentation is To Blend or Not to Blend, Pedagogical Challenges and Adaptations in Africans' Higher Education in a Post-COVID-19 Era. So just a short bio on both presenters. Edwin Rwingi has nearly a decade of experience implementing, managing, and providing programmatic and technical support for programs in nonprofit, civil society, research, and academic settings. He's currently the program officer at the Partnership for African Social and Governance Research, which is a not-for-profit organization based in Kenya. Shortly, that is PASGR. And then Eunice is also a professor of religion at Moi University in Kenya, an international affiliate of Indiana University in the US. She holds an MPhil in religion and an MSc in international health research ethics and a PhD in African Christian ethics. So I will hand over to both of them for them to take us through our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Let me share my slide. Please confirm you can see them all right?
Yes, I can see them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. My name is Edwin Rwingi, as you've heard from Krista. I'm the program officer for the higher education program at PASGR. And today I am delighted to be co-presenting this presentation with Professor Eunice Kamara from Moi University. And as you've heard, The title of the presentation is To Blend or Not to Blend, Reflections on Africa's Higher Education in a Post-COVID-19 World. So this is the order in which I'm making this presentation. And also for clarification, we are not presenting findings from a research study, but rather our experience implementing a pedagogical project across Africa in East, South, and Western Africa. So the order of our presentation, I'll first start off painting a background of the impact of COVID-19 on higher education in Africa, then contextualize it in e-learning in Africa, basically speaking, where e-learning is, and try to draw out some outcomes, learning outcomes from the e-learning move in Africa. And with that, I will try to also highlight emerging gaps in capacity, especially in teaching and learning. And from that, I will tie in the PEDAL project, which is Pedagogical Leadership in Africa project, as an intervention attempting to respond to some of these challenges. The very last thing that I'm going to do is highlight some prompts about trends in e-learning in Africa. And I will invite the plenary and the panelists to reflect on some items. So to begin, when the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, this was March of 2020, through all the way to 2021, most African universities were forced to rethink their long-distance learning modalities or suspend teaching and learning altogether. And this is what most universities actually did, according to a survey. About 77% of African universities shut down their campuses, most of 2020 and leading into 2021. At this particular time, generally across the world, there was a renewed interest in education technologies for distance and e-learning. So should I say 2 or so decades, or a decade before COVID became a reality, most of the world, and mostly the global north, had quite embraced the online teaching and learning for various benefits that come from it. Could be for learning efficiency, cost reduction, scalability, and all these things. Unfortunately, not much had been invested in most sub-Saharan African universities as far as distance learning is concerned, with the exception of South Africa, as some of you might know, going into the literature around e-learning during this time. And a study by the International Association of University suggests that only 29% of universities were ready for the great shift online, that only 29% of African universities were able to transition their students to online teaching and learning. And it goes on to also suggest that a third of all universities lacked their prerequisite ICT infrastructure for this transition. Within this context, some of the challenges that African universities were experiencing from our own experience as PASGR implementing in this space, and also from literature, you'll find this, should I say, overarching challenges being highlighted. For example, there's lack of capacity in interactive online tools for teaching and learning, limited electronic content, high rates of ICT illiteracy, and low comfort levels with technology. This is actually very interesting because you'll find that in 2020 and 2021, essentially the typical university student is one who was born within the internet age. They're a little bit more tech savvy, and you have lecturers, many who may not be, who are trying their best to catch up with that. So there's a generation gap even in should I say, flexibility with which teaching and learning is done around digital tools. There's also challenges to do with limited internet access. I highlight this for a reason. So the International Association of University did a subsequent survey 1 year later, and what that study found is that more universities were now offering remote teaching and learning. Yeah, so this is a great improvement from the previous year. The only unfortunate thing is that 26% of all African university students could not access classes online. Again, this highlights pre-existing inequalities in higher education, and is another challenge that needs to be addressed. So within this context, some of the outcomes that were emerging, generally speaking, again, citing from another study, UNESCO in 2021 found that there was a drop in student performance by about 66% during the great shift online. For the most part, this is 2021. And the challenges with e-learning in Africa, they are old, as has been noted, should I say a decade ago. Somebody noted that challenges in Africa's e-learning have little to do with the technology and more to do with weak e-learning systems. This was a decade ago, and it still persists. So with all the challenges that we can get to appreciate, what PASGR tries to focus on, particularly sure the system and policy level changes that we could most definitely draw our energies and resources to, but that which is, should I say, within our mandate and scope of work is pedagogy gaps for lecturers. And I just want to highlight some of the things that we have observed while implementing our interventions. So at the height of COVID, we quickly came to appreciate and try to communicate this to partner universities that having a lecturer's mastery of a subject matter is not enough. It does not cut it as far as online teaching and learning is concerned. Sure, you may have an individual who is very gifted, brilliant, for example, sociologist, has done amazing research, but that does not mean they automatically are a good teacher. And it becomes even more complicated when you have to ask them to teach or to conduct online teaching. Online teaching and learning require an untraditional pedagogical approach. It's not just curating content on a cloud platform and sending out Zoom links and inviting people for class. There's more to it. There's more to the madness, if I may put it as such. Higher education teaching and learning is complex, and when you add the digital element to it, it becomes even more layered. So appreciating this context, PASGR designed the PEDO Online Technology for Transformative Pedagogy program and launched it in June 2020. This program builds on PASGR's extensive experience in capacity training for blended teaching and learning for a program that we started back in 2018. So we already had the infrastructure, the resource persons, should I say the curriculum and the modules in place that just needed a little bit of retweaking, and should I say having a bit of uptick with our partner universities for them to transition to fully online teaching and learning. So what PEDO Online essentially tries to do is ground educators in the art and science of teaching and learning and better prepare them for future shocks or learning disruptions. So we do this using a three-pronged strategy. We have how we implement our workshops, our training, our capacity enhancement engagements. We do this through a training of trainers model. Essentially, we will partner with the university, get to train a cohort of their lecturers, and this cohort will subsequently be expected to train their colleagues. And eventually, what we build is a community of practice within a university that can then conduct peer-to-peer learning exchanges. Yeah. And at the third strategy is to institutionalize PEDO's suite of methodologies. So we have our methodologies on our learning management systems, and initial trainings with partners, we invite their lecturers to come and train on our platform. By the time they've built their community of practice, we then get into an agreement where we migrate our content from our platform onto their learning management systems. We also discovered many universities had already invested in learning management systems. The unfortunate thing is that they were being underutilized. So I'm going to show you sort of like a picture of an image of universities that have been able to take up a suite of learning methodologies. For now, I just want to highlight what PEDO Online, the core modules are all about. So we have 3 core modules. We have course design, facilitation, and assessment. So under course design, participants are taught about learning design and constructive alignment using the Bloom taxonomy, the new revised Bloom taxonomy learning design. we also get to invite participants to interact with learning management systems and also do course authoring, digital course authoring, and the use of multimedia resources. For facilitation, we encourage participants to get acquainted with synchronous and asynchronous, that is live or not live tools of teaching and learning. And also we get to do a bit of micro teaching for practice. And innovative assessment, we stress the need for assessment for learning, not assessment of learning, and also assessing for 21st century skills, and also the use of assessment rubrics. So in the period since we launched PEDO Online, that's June of 2020 to December of 2021, we had trained 1,879 lecturers from Eastern, Western, and Southern Africa. And this represents 62 universities and 37 technical colleges. And this our footprint covers 8 African countries in this time. So clearly there is an appreciation for what we've been doing, and lecturers and universities, should I say senior management, is appreciating the need to build the capacities of their lecturers, and that's why there's all this interest and uptake for it. So in the year 2021, we managed to integrate our suite of learning methodologies in the learning management systems of these 10 universities. As you can see the timeline from March all the way to November of 2021. So clearly there is interest in this. And now the hope is that these universities are able to conduct their own independent PEDO online trainings for their lecturers. So at this point, what I want to do is invite Professor Eunice Kamara, who is a lecturer from Moi University, as you've heard. She's one of our PEDO champions, and should I say one of the active members of our communities, wider community of practice, to sort of like share with us her experience of peer-to-peer support through PEDO at the University of Moi. And I'll then come back with some prompt questions and we can take it from there.
Thank you very much, Edwin, for that presentation this far. Yes, as Edwin has said, my name is Eunice Kamara. I'm a professor at Moi University. I was employed in 1991 as an untrained teacher. Those of you who are from East Africa know about UTs. That is untrained teacher. It means I hadn't gone to anybody's training institution on how to teach, or even how to design, facilitate, or assess teaching and learning. And I worked as an untrained teacher for close to 20 years before I met PASGR. Initially, I got in touch with PASGR as trainee in one of their professional development courses on multi-method research. And I got to learn so much there so that when I talk about capacity strengthening in my career, the thing that comes to my mind immediately is PASGR, because this is what has strengthened my capacity. Like you hear, for 20 years, I was working without any training whatsoever. And basically I was teaching like I had seen my teachers teach, which was a lot of teaching with probably very little learning. Come 2018, almost 30 years working in the university, I got introduced again by PASGR to PEDAL, Pedagogical Leadership in Africa. And in this training, we learned about, like Edwin has said, course design, course facilitation, and innovative assessment. For me, it was a crash program because I was learning how to design courses for the first time. I was learning how to facilitate for the first time. I was learning how to assess officially for the first time, 30 years into my teaching. And at the same time, I was learning how to integrate technology in teaching and learning. So it was quite a clash program, but I was determined because I had had a very good experience with the PDT program on multi-method research. I knew I was going to get quite some good training here. So I concentrated quite a bit, and I can tell you I had an awesome experience. It was amazing. in terms of transforming the way I do things as a university teacher, in terms of empowering me and giving me confidence that when I'm in class, I'm doing the right thing and that I'm being inclusive. I am being deliberate. I'm conscious about what it is that I would want my learners to learn. And I'm conscious about teaching across the different domains of teaching and learning. So this has been a very, very empowering opportunity for me. And I'm so grateful to PASGR, forever quite grateful. I talk to PASGR outside official setting, and I'm constantly just expressing my gratitude. But I want to talk about what happened after 2020. When PEDAL went online and we started what we call blended, or what is called blended learning. We learned how to do design blended courses and how to facilitate them and even how to assess. But 2020 was even more interesting for me because we were here in Eldoret at Moi University. Every one of us is locked up in their houses with the lockdowns. Students are all over not knowing what to do. Lecturers are all over not knowing what to do. And I said, well, at PASGR, there was something about communities of practice. So I challenged myself, what can I do? What do I do with what I learned from PASGR through PEDAL? So what I did is I put up an advert online and said, anybody interested in learning how to teach online, please reach out to me. And let me see. And I said, I don't want everybody reaching out to me, so I'll put a cost to it. And I said, we'll be charging about $10 per hour. And I said, I only want 10 people because I can't learn a big class. Of course, I wasn't confident. This is the first time I was going to do it online and to do it alone. So I said 10 people. And in less than a week, I think in 3 days, I had 15 people. And I had to literally insist, no, I can't have any more. Let's go on. And we started learning online. And together with some people who also had some knowledge, we were able to learn through the entire course on how to design courses, how to facilitate courses, and even how to assess courses. Not forgetting how to integrate gender and intersectionality, inclusivity, and diversity in teaching and learning. And we did this. At the end of it, we didn't charge. It was like, this was a surprise. We are not charging. This was just for us to learn. And we were going to replicate this, except that the universities by that point were now closed and there was no more learning. And we said, we'll pick these up when we open. And of course, 2021, the universities opened. And the interesting thing is that the community of practice that we had already established at Moi University was ready to move. And many of those 15 have been working with blended, have been doing a lot of blended learning. So you can see the way PEDAL had a transformative effect, not just for me, but for many other people through some kind of multiplication effect. We continue to work on our skills and to spread the message. And for this, we say thank you to PASGR. Thank you very much. Over to you, Edwin.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much. So with that, an observation I want to make, despite of, for example, all we've been able to do as PASGR through PEDAL, a trend we've observed, especially in 2022, is that many universities are abandoning e-learning, while others have still persisted. I know of a local university that still, for the most part, teaching and learning is happening online. But across the continent, universities are abandoning e-learning. And we can all appreciate that it served as a temporary measure as a response to the pandemic and to mitigate the closures. So there's definitely a great imperative to invest in robust digital learning ecosystems and build on gains made during at the peak of the pandemic. Yeah. So with this, I would like to maybe prompt everyone here to some of these questions for reflection. Even as we now think of a post-COVID-19 world, where I feel like we have had a proof of concept as far as blended teaching and learning is concerned, how should African universities follow through with e-learning implementation? That's number one. Number two, how can universities in sub-Saharan Africa build resilience to adapt to volatility and invest in robust digital learning ecosystems? Because clearly this has not happened. For the most part, we're only curating content on Google Drive or whatever cloud computing platform we have, and sharing links to Zoom and Skype. Number three, what kind of structured support can universities provide to faculty in the areas of blended and online pedagogy? Yeah. Number four, what are some of the quality assurance mechanisms that African universities can put in place to support the transition from face-to-face to blended or fully online? Again, some people have concerns that there's this general feeling that if teaching and learning is not happening in person, its quality has been diluted or it's not robust enough. So if we are to design robust teaching and learning systems, what measures can we put in place to guarantee the quality of these learning experiences? Number five, how can African universities tap into the opportunities presented by massive open online courses? These are the likes of Coursera, edX, and the such. I'm meant to believe even Coursera has, at the peak of the pandemic, also designed a MOOC, a short course, a massive open online course to teach lecturers how to redesign their courses for online delivery. And I think edX also provides sort of like a mirror of their platform where universities can enroll their students onto edX, and then you can get to, for example, instruct your course. There are also opportunities for to offer ODEL offerings to attract students from across the globe. For example, say here in University of Nairobi, you have a really good program, say on methods. You design it pretty well on edX, publish it on edX, and you have students from across the world, should it be Sri Lanka or Venezuela, enroll into your program. These are opportunities to explore. And number six, what creative co-financing and partnerships can universities in Africa explore to provide educational technology solutions to their students? So again, as I also highlighted, the infrastructure is lacking. Also, financing pedagogical training requires quite a bit of investing. What creative co-financing and partnerships can African universities get enter for them to guarantee the structures and the systems needed are in place? So with that, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to us. And I will turn it back to Krista, who's going to guide us, or I believe the moderator, who's going to guide us on how to go next. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edwin, and thank you, Eunice. That was an extremely insightful presentation. Let me just share my screen again. And then I'll just quickly introduce the panelists as we get ready for the panel discussion that will take place shortly. If any participants has any questions with regards to the presentation that was just done, you can just put that in the chat box or in the Q&A feature, or you can also hold on to it. And when we get to the Q&A session towards the end of the webinar, you can ask the panelists or the presenters at that time. So I'll just quickly introduce our panelists. We have three panelists who will be speaking to us today. We have Natasha, who is a professor at the School of Public Management and Administration at the University of Pretoria. She has a BA degree in political science, a BA in public administration, an MA cum laude in public administration, and a PhD from the University of South Africa. In July 2022, Natasha was elected to represent Africa on the Board of Management of the International Association of Schools and Institutes of Administration, as well as a steering committee member of the International Commission on the Accreditation of Public Administration and Training Programs. We have our other panelist, Wanjira, who is a professor of learning design and technology. Currently, she's involved in teaching, research, curriculum development, and instructional design work in higher education and NGOs in Africa, the Caribbean, the US, and the UAE. She also mentors graduate students and early career professionals. And then finally, we have Professor Samuel Amponsa from the University of Ghana, who is an associate professor at the University of Ghana, where he heads the distance education department. Prior to his appointment at the university, Samuel lectured and headed the farming management department of Esaidi TVET College in South Africa. And he recently completed a postdoctoral fellowship with the American University in Cairo under the sponsorship of the Beck Africa and Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And he was appointed as an adjunct associate professor by the University of South Africa in 2021, and in 2022 as a visiting lecturer at the Birmingham Christian College in the United Kingdom. And this panel will be moderated by Dr. Pauline ESSA, who is the Director of Research and Programs at ESSA. So I'll hand over now to Pauline and to the rest of our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Krista. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining and staying with us. And thank you very much to Edwin and for helping us to understand, taking us back down memory lane to remember how difficult things were in 2020, 2021 during the pandemic, but also how incentives and interventions like PEDAL and PEDAL Online helped some of our researchers and lecturers in African universities to try and adapt to the unforeseen and changing situations that COVID-19 provided, and how to best support our institutions to go through teaching and learning. But also the intervention and the message from Eunice really brought to life how practical some of these solutions have been over time, and the need to keep them going and to build on the initiatives that have been set up. So also Edwin kindly provided us with some thoughts for reflection. And so in this panel session, we're going to think about some of those questions and add in a few more and see how our expert panelists think we should be addressing some of the issues identified. We're all here to learn and to share. And so we'll do this in a respectful and interactive manner. And I can assure the audience that once we've finished discussing initial questions with the panel, we will open it up, invite the speakers to join, and then we will take questions from the audience. So as Krista said, please feel free to drop questions in the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to cover as many as we can, and where possible to also allow participants to ask their questions themselves. So if I could get our panelists to please turn on their computer. I can see Samuel is already on. Yes, and Wanjira is here as well. So thank you. So I guess a question to all the panelists really, starting off with the reflections. Based on your listening to Edwin and Eunice's presentation, and also your own expertise and experience in the field, can I ask what your reflections are on how African universities can continue to build on experiences during the pandemic and strengthen their ways of teaching and learning, especially the online and blended formats? So I'll start first with Wanjira, and I'll move on to Samuel and then Natasha, please.
Thank you very much, Pauline and Edwin and Eunice. You've given us a very good context for us to begin to think about how we move forward. But it also helps, as you said, to start this from a reflection perspective. So what did we do right? And where can we improve on? So there are some things I believe we did right. You know, I know of institutions that at the drop of a hat, next day, maybe they had a LMS that was partially utilized, but there was a little bit of capacity build such that within a week or less, they were able to move forward. But I think that took a lot of resilience, let me call it that. And it also took a lot of motivation to be able to move forward. So some of this was self-driven, some of it was mandate. Different people did it differently. But I think what it tells us is to move forward, think about how can we be innovative So Eunice gave us an example of how she got people who are self-driven to do that. So thinking about innovative strategies of making us think beyond what we've been doing, continue to do what we were doing right, but also to try and learn from what we did wrong. So I know many things happened. It was, slides moving very quickly online, not thinking about maybe learning outcomes, learning objectives, instructional strategies, all those, but that's fine. I said that's okay. The job was accomplished for what needed to be done for the most part. But I think what we need to now do is step back and start to think about how we can do this and do it right. And we also can think of this as we have two columns. You have the column of how we did it, and then a column of how can we move forward. So whatever we got right, we keep doing. Whatever we didn't, we continue to refine and refresh and think about how we can do that from a different perspective now that we are not rushing to do things as quickly as we were. Thank you.
Thank you, Wanjira. Any thoughts or reflections from Samuel, please?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Pauline and everyone here. Yeah, Wanjira has spoken very well about what was done right and what we need to do. Yes, agreeably, I belong to the University of Ghana, and the University of Ghana has adopted the Sakai Learning Management System since 2014. Surprisingly, apart from the Department of Distance Education and perhaps the School of Continuing Distance Education, there are some within the university who didn't even know about it, or were just not ready to move online. Based on the Rogers diffusion of innovation theory, those of us from this part of the world may largely be known as late laggards or late majority or whatever. Yes, it reflects. But then the good side of COVID-19 is how it escalated online learning. So everybody was compelled some way, somehow to move there. There were policies from my university to guide that, though not very much elaborate on the consequence of not doing that and all that. But largely, we were able to move online. For Department of Distance Education, we had already piloted a full online model a semester before the the breakout of the pandemic. So for us, it was seamless. We trained tutors online, we trained students, and for us, the only challenge was exams, because we still write sitting exams largely. But as Edwin rightly said, African universities have relented. Now there's almost a full move. I admit that some lecturers are still using the online. Some are even doing online assessments, continuous assessment, but the greater majority have gone back to the old ways. And the question was, how do we sustain this? It has to be driven by policy. Awareness has to be created. Because, many a times we think that once you're able to, the practice was people put content on Sakai learning management, and then we think we are using learning management systems, but that was not it. So there has to be awareness, there has to be policies, there has to be deliberate efforts of getting digital gadgets. You and I know how much it costs here. Not every student can afford it. Not every faculty can afford top-notch gadgets to enable online learning. And so I think with those 3 points, I'll end here and come back later. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Samuel. So we're getting some key insights coming through cost of equipment. We're hearing about, the need for institutional policies to really enforce some of these lessons that were learned and to keep them alive. There's also the issue of internal communication within our universities. How well did we do to make our institutional members, students, staff aware of potential opportunities for learning and improving what we do in a blended or online format, and how can we keep that going and do better next time, not wait for the next pandemic before we go scrambling again. These are all useful insights to tease out and to have all of us as attendees think about, and as Lucy said at the beginning, what do we take away from this session to change within our own means in our institution. So as we carry on the conversation and the discussion, please take note of some of these excellent contributions coming through from our panelists, and let's see what we can do with it going forward. So I'll move on to Natasha now, just to hear your thoughts and reflections on what we've heard so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. I want to just start off by saying that as I'm coming from the University of Pretoria, I should mention that, you know, I come from a well-resourced university, and I think that also comes into play in terms of how we deal with any kind of a disruption that comes your way. But it doesn't mean that if you are a well-resourced university, that you cannot implement what we have learned. And I think that is, like Wanjera said, you know, sit back, reflect on in terms of what were the lessons we learned, both positive and negative, and how do we build on it? Now, from the University of Pretoria's side, I'm going to remind you that in October 2015, we had the Fees Must Fall movement. And I think then already in 2015, we realized that because suddenly we had to go online and we were not prepared. We were really prepared. You know, some lecturers did try certain things because we did use so we are using Blackboard as our learning system, and we call it Click Up, Click UP. And then the university really went on a full-blown training mode. So we really got a lot of training. And I think, how do we follow through with e-learning implementation? I doubt if we would have fully, that all of us would be fully e-learning orientated, but I think it's going to be a hybrid. A hybrid is going to be more what we do. And what we did back in 2016, actually towards the end of October 2015 as well, was to thereafter say that at least 25% of our content had to be online, as well as one of your assessments, because you have to train people, you have to train students. So we have to keep in mind that we are always going to get new lecturers, we are going to get new students coming into the system. So we need to ensure that they are fully fledged in terms of the technicalities around e-learning. And we also need to remember, I know that, you know, in Pedal, we were often asked this as well, you know, because we are subject matter experts. And it took me sitting with educational specialists to realize that I don't really understand how to design courses, how to fully do that. So I think and Eunice also mentioned it, so we have to keep on training in pedagogy, because, you know, we know our stuff, I know my discipline, but how to fully embrace, you know, all the pedagogies and how do I implement it? I think that is something that is important for our universities to keep on doing if we want to successfully implement e-learning. So continue, but we will do it differently. You should know there will always be disruptions. In South Africa, we, for example, on the 20th of March, we're going to have a disruption again. So it was already decided that all classes will be presented online. So it's never, ever going to end. So we can't just shy away from disruptions. It's going to happen. In our case, labor unrest, whatever the case might be, it's going to continue. And then also, I think we want to create that agile organizations. And we have agile organizations. It would be easier for us to be able to implement as African universities and also as global universities. We're not just African universities, we, you know, partners in the global society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Definitely there need to be decisive and proactive about learning and doing as we go along. And I'm wondering, back to you, in terms of quality assurance of some of the interventions, especially exams, say moving online. Natasha, what do you think, based on your experience at Pretoria and maybe elsewhere, based on literature or whatever, what do you think could be done or was done and could continue to be done to really assure students and universities that assessing online through blended or online learning could actually still be fit for purpose and to give people that assurance that they are learning and getting degrees that are as good as when they were only doing this in class or on paper?
Thank you, Pauline. I think in the first place, we need to also consider reputation, bearing in mind that each university is a brand, the continent is a brand. And often we look towards a certain university and we have a certain perspective on it. Now, I happen to be a lecturer at a distance learning institution in South Africa. You don't have to guess which one it is. It's UNISA. I'm going to share that with you. But then also, I was a student in a completely different discipline to my own. So I experienced it from both sides. And I can tell you, absence does not make the heart grow fonder. So if we want to ensure quality, we need to ensure that we communicate with our students, that students really know what are the expectations and what do we do from it. So with UNISA, we had a monitor in terms of our examinations to ensure that you are compliant. You had to check in at things. So there are lots of invigilated tools that we can use. But in terms of quality assurance, I really think that if we want to ensure it, we have to keep to certain principles, such as independent evaluators. We also need to ensure that, and Eunice, you spoke about the community of practice, that we ensure that as a community, and I'm not talking about all of us, that we consider, for example, and share our what we are doing. So to ensure that we ask, we share, we ensure inclusivity, but then also asking ourselves the question. So we're moving from a classroom to hybrid, or in some instances, fully then virtually. But what does our virtual learning environment look like? Does it look the same as in class? And do we really achieve the same outcomes? And I think that is also why it's so important to be strict. And I think even more so because of plagiarism and cheating concerns. I'm just going to put it out there. So really coming up to try and firstly to create a culture where we stand in integrity, but then also close monitoring, but monitoring of us, by us, for us. I sound now typically like somebody who is in government. So that's what I think. The reputation, the branding. I, for example, what I did with them in 2020, they now master students, and they would remind me of things we did, which they now want to use in their tutorial classes. So I think it's really sharing ideas and ask also what worked for you and what not, and ask the students, in the end, our customers. And it's not that the customer is always right, but they know what. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Natasha. Yeah, lots of good suggestions for us to think about. And I like the fact that you brought in the student voices as well, because at the end of the day, what we're doing in the institutions is to empower them, to equip them with the knowledge and the skills they need to be able to leave university and find meaningful employment, or actually create employment opportunities for themselves and others. So we need that assurance that they are going to get the best out of these institutions, be it through online or blended or in-person teaching and learning. So Wanjira, just to come back to you, in terms of your interest in this subject area, are you able to share with us any sort of examples of emerging technologies or good practice in teaching and learning online or abroad that you are aware of that perhaps we could learn from as African institutions?
Yeah, thanks again, Pauline. So the way I see it, we are already interconnected as a world. We are not in isolation. I think where we are trying to keep up and we struggle because sometimes our resources are limited is the funding side. But we do have access to facilities and options, and we can see what's already going on in other parts of the world. So I think rather than reinvent, we can be part of the invention, but we can also borrow and tap into what already exists. So I know there's different opportunities, different strategies, different technologies that are being used. Some of them we're already using them. So I like to use the example, for instance, of the LMS. Sam and Natasha have already talked about that. But I think of this as the way we utilize something that we all use, for instance, Microsoft Office, we use only a very small percentage of it. If you were to go to the advanced features, many of us don't even tap into them because we don't necessarily need them. So my point here is, with what we already exists, what can we use? I think most LMSs, for instance, come with basics, but then there's add-ons we can use. And there's also ways to integrate existing tools, for instance, social tools, wikis, blogs. There's others, there's proprietary ones, there's free ones that can be very well integrated. So I'll give an example. In one class, you might be using discussions, but it doesn't necessarily mean you use the discussion forums that come with it. Those are fine, but let's give the students opportunities to integrate other ways of doing it. You know, there's things that we've seen, like Padlet, we've seen quizzes. These are all social tools. There's many, many more. I don't think we can exhaust the list, and tomorrow morning there'll even be more that we haven't seen yet. But my point is, take the time to see what's there, explore for institutions that already have a little bit of that expertise, or some have instructional designers, some might not. But I believe most would have an ICT department or a student support center that helps to start exploring some of those tools and to integrate them and see what works. In terms of, and Edwin mentioned this, cloud computing, think about the costs. There's times that we are trying to do things on the ground. It costs a lot more. What are these shared solutions that are out there that can still give us the same opportunities? And, you know, in other words, what can we hand over to somebody who's an expert at that area to focus on it for us as we focus on the instructional side. So if it's an ICT company that's doing that, or a security company, tap into their own resources while we focus on what we are here to do, which is to really help our students learn, or whether it's research or whatever else it is we are doing. Again, still on the topic of how we adapt the technologies, there's LMSs that come as there, but there's also others that are adaptable in how we choose. So they can help students select their learning path based on the inputs that the students are putting in. They can see which courses are best geared to help the student learn, or pace them, or help them review things that they're having difficulty doing. So there's many things I can think of. For people in the sciences, for instance, we've all seen simulations, we've seen virtual reality, augmented reality. We're already seeing those being implemented in certain areas, the sciences particularly. And there's many resources that have already been created. Actually, many of them are OER by some organizations where you can already borrow from that. So rather than saying, where do we start? Let's see what's already there and build on that, and even help us build our own capacity in being some of those networks that help to create some of those open resources for sciences, you know, especially the STEM subjects. There's a lot in that area as well. So there are many more I could talk about, but I'll stop there and then maybe give the opportunity to somebody else to maybe share what else they've done in their own context.
Thank you very much, Wanjira. I totally agree with you on the need to try all sort of interactive tools like the Jamboards and whatever to be more inclusive of these students and bring in their ideas, because it is frustrating to be talking to the screen and not getting anything back. So definitely areas where I'm sure people have enjoyed being able to contribute as students, but also as staff to these kind of new approaches. I'm also thinking what you're talking about brings to mind all these MOOCs, the massive open online courses, and also ODEL, which has become a common word now being used in terms of open distance education and learning, e-learning. And I suppose those are all parts of the jigsaw, the puzzle in terms of opening up learning opportunities to many. And as we've already touched on, cost and resource availability does come into the equation. So might those MOOCs and ODEL be sort of avenues for us to reach more people and for us to be able to get more people online? I'll target that question to Natasha, but someone will be on standby. My next question will come to you. Thank you. Natasha, any thoughts on the MOOCs and ODEL?
I think that, you know, the world has presented us with a lot of opportunities. So whether it's through MOOCs, ODL, the offerings, but also, you know, LinkedIn. There are courses that we can use and that we can enter for free. And I think in terms of our institutions and higher education institutions, it's really the time to not function in silos. You know, it's really the time to work together. I always say together we achieve more. So let students enroll, and it could be perhaps we will not be making as much money, but you know, if students are already, I almost want to say, in the system, they might continue. You know, back home, well, I'm saying back home because I'm currently in Kenya. Back home in South Africa, I have quite a number of organizations that it's for 100 South African rand. They literally do from courses, advanced courses, and the purpose is to create empowerment. And I think if we tap into the different opportunities that would be presented, whether it's ODL, so yeah, I say ODL, not ODL. So it's context again, I think, you know, how we pronounce, but then in terms of the MOOCs, and then if we are solid in terms of our offerings, you know, solid in terms of the pedagogy, the technical aspects, you know, making sure that the ICTs that we do use, that it is of a good quality, you know, that it's easy accessible. We will attract people from across the globe to become part of our student population. Yes. So just in short, what I think in terms of that. So let's empower through what we have available.
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. And again, it's sometimes we forget that although we have divisions across geographies, these kind of online platforms do unite us as a global education system, and we do need to be able to engage with those beyond our continent and see how best we can get that mixture of knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing. And so, yes, if this is a way to connect better with the rest of the world and bring learning from Africa to other parts of the world and vice versa, I totally agree with us embracing these opportunities. So thank you for that contribution. So Samuel, given your area of expertise and your interest, I'm wondering whether you have any suggestions for the kind of measures that might be put in place to enable online and blended teaching and learning to be more inclusive. So often we have certain groups that can be marginalized generally in education. And so in this aspect of capacity strengthening for online teaching and learning, what are your views on how we can be more inclusive for marginalized groups?
All right, thank you. So I suppose my question is related to the underprivileged, all right?
Yes.
Disabled.
Yes.
Okay, so I wouldn't go to what Natasha and other people have said. Okay, so right, until the advent of the COVID pandemic, we thought the disabled were doing well. I mean, things were normal for them. My research has mainly concentrated on visually impaired students, but one of the things that inspired me is a paper by Brown and Nami, where they looked at disabled students generally, and it was mainly about infrastructure and all that. Because at the University of Ghana, we have the OSSN, the Office of the Students with Special Needs, who work with these students and department faculty to ameliorate their challenges and all that. During exams, they will always be calling hello department and exams officers to see how best we can help them. The University of Ghana Computing Systems also has a special unit for special needs students, where they have the large screen computers for and the audio, what do you call it, gadgets for all these kinds of students with disabilities. But surprisingly, when we moved online during the heat of the COVID-19, that's why I undertook this study, echoing the voices of students with visually impaired SWVI, echoing the voice of students with visual impairments in a pandemic-inspired online learning. And the findings were quite troubling. Some of them call themselves the silent minority, because number one, you know, it was quite sad when you you are in the city centers in Accra, Kumasi, and you think things are all rosy. Mohammed did a documentary for Al Jazeera I'm Ghanaian, I've lived in Ghana almost all my life, but I was surprised to see that there are still high school students, higher education students who don't have radio sets in their homes to enjoy any form of online learning. You know, the government of Ghana quickly brought an intervention, TV stations that were airing studies content and all that. Such students don't have radio sets, don't have even what we call a dumb phone, let alone a smartphone to engage in online learning. And so they were totally cut off. Now, what about those who were fortunate enough to afford or access gadgets to join? Those are the people who call themselves the silent majority. Because I think Natasha was talking about pedagogical approaches. Now go back to the literature. You see that almost every work that has been written on disabled students learning, whether in the face-to-face space or online space, have been guided with 20th century theories. The behaviorism, the constructivism, these are not effective for online learning. If you want to move into the 21st century theories like connectivism and Harrison's online collaboratism, people are not using that. Also, lecturers, faculty, instructors are fixated with the old philosophies of teaching, teacher-centered. So yes, I agree with Natasha that in South Africa, they are well-endowed schools. But in one of my readings at the peak of COVID, there's a professor who confessed that, I mean, they had all the facilities. So now they had to move online. So they will bring, I think UP did that. They were using video cameras to record. And so they were recording them live and they were teaching just, so what, in essence, they transposed face-to-face learning to online learning, which doesn't help. So, I mean, pedagogical strategies, online strategies need to be enhanced. How do we design courses? How do we bring in alternative forms of assessment when we move online? What about the students? We think of training faculty all the time. Have we offered any training for, what do you call it, students? Or we take it that they are digital natives, so they can simply zoom into online learning? It doesn't work that way, especially for people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. There's a study I just finished drafting. I compared the experience of visually impaired students in Ghana and students from Egypt. And you know, American University in Cairo is a prestigious institution. So every student who can afford that institution can buy digital gadgets. And the university even allows them to borrow. So now that was the case. During COVID, some of them could borrow. What about those in Ghana here? So if you can't borrow, then you are cut off from learning. And another phenomenon that we've forgotten that we need to revisit is the difference between accessibility and usability. Universities are doing well. Generally, universities are doing well, not on the same scale. We are providing gadgets for all sorts of people. But what about usability? That challenge, but I can't explicate that much. I don't want to take all the time. So if we really want to, what do you call it? Make the online side of hybrid learning engaging, successful, especially for students, we also look at what we call the accessibility, because globally, I've done a review globally. People who have done an assessment of university websites, learning platforms, and all that have found major faults and issues with accessibility, and not only for those with impairments, even for the able-bodied students. So these are issues that I think we need to really re-engineer to make hybrid learning more effective. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samuel. I'm all for respectful and healthy debates in these kind of panels. So I like what you've brought to this to get us thinking more broadly about how others who may not be as fortunate or as well-resourced or well-abled as the majority, how they may struggle even more in these kind of situations and and to think creatively about how we can support them, at least try to level the playing field a bit to make sure that all our lecturers and our students are in a position to be able to teach and learn during these periods. And as others have said earlier, we are in the phase now where there isn't a panic setting in, and we have the time now to adjust and to put in place the structures that we need for going forward. So I hope this debate, these conversations are helping us all to think about what we can do next to address the issues that are coming through. But in relation to that, I want this question to go to any of the panelists, really. Building on that, do we think there are any particular challenges that could be gender focused? And if so, what are they and how might we address them? In terms of, was there a gender element to all of this teaching and learning and the impact of COVID that you are aware of or could highlight? Natasha, please. Thank you. Natasha, please.
Thank you, Pauline. So I definitely think there was an element of gender to it. So what we saw was that, especially in terms of the female students, during COVID, they they had more responsibilities in the home. I've had students who didn't get to their studies because they had to take care, for example, of their mother-in-laws, because of cultural, the context, and in terms of cultural traditions, having to take care of the family, the in-laws, not getting to their own studies. We also saw that in terms of our postgraduate students, a lot where the progress of especially the female students were not as fast or progressive as, for example, the male students. And it was actually something that we often discussed at the university in terms of what can we do, even giving extensions and extending the periods of registration because of what we noticed during COVID. I think there was definitely a gender element that came into play. Back up, yes.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from Samuel Wanjira?
Yeah, I can say something on that. And it's
Yes,
actually something which kind of surprisingly caught me by surprise, because I thought, having been in the space for a while, you've seen most things. But it was more recently on a panel with students and what their experiences were during COVID. And this was a group of students. This is in Kenya, but there were many international students in that panel. And one of them said something which made me pause and think about, do we factor some of these elements in our course design? So one of the things she said was, from her culture, she was from a different country. I don't remember specifically which one, but she said she's not allowed to have a gadget. So she cannot have a laptop, she cannot have a phone for different reasons, because she's young or unmarried or whatever the situation is. So as Natasha was talking, I thought about that. So when we say we're going online, then there's a student who cannot access the information through that format. What do we do? And I think Sam also mentioned it, we inadvertently end up leaving students out. But I think also in terms of the design of the courses themselves, there's what we think about as universal design of learning. So when you design for one and you design it well, then you design for many. So putting those elements means that you're also trying to integrate and accommodate as many learners as possible. The question is, I have 500, how am I going to do it for every one of them? We're not saying it's easy, but I think making an effort, I think also shows the students that we really do care about how we do it and how we connect to them. So again, in the area of learning design, we also talk about quality by design and what does that mean. So you're designing from the ground up. And maybe at some point, Prof. Eunice might mention something about that, because that's her area as well. But in terms of the language that we use when we're designing content, that's also something to think about. Are we using inclusive language? Are we using terms that people can understand and interpret in different contexts? So I think there are multiple levels and multiple ways, but it became even more evident because if you have an LMS, and you look at some course and you see the language that is used, it can also be indicative of maybe where there are gaps with the instructors and facilitators that can help build that into the course design.
Thank you very much, Wanjira. Samuel, did you have anything to add?
On gender, I have not seen any issues emerging from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are so many more questions I could ask the panelists, but in the interest of bringing in our audience, our guests, I will move on to the Q&A session and also invite Edwin and Eunice to please switch on their cameras and join us. I can see there are questions coming through, and one is already asking about, I mean, we have talked about the need to bring in interactive teaching and learning and having to move online. And there's a question that has already come through about the fact that internet connectivity is sometimes an issue for some of the learners, and I'm sure that the lecturers as well. So as a first question to the speakers and the panelists, and anyone can respond at this point, what do you think the resource challenges present to those who may not have the ability to go online? Sometimes because they don't have the gadgets, other times because of just the internet availability in their locations. Anyone want to respond to that, please?
Perhaps I could go and say, give it a first go. Of course, there is a disadvantage, or there is a marginalization when we think of access in terms of availability due to cost or due to whatever reason of some of the infrastructure that is required for e-learning. But we need to remember all the time that very often a disadvantage can be turned around to become an advantage. It is possible for vulnerability to become an opportunity to innovate. And I'm saying this because I have seen students at Moi University advise us, lecturers, on how to use very simple platforms like WhatsApp to do very amazing things, things that I didn't imagine I could do before. And they are the ones who are telling us, I'm sharing this like this, then you realize, oh, okay, so I could also share like that. So we are like merging different platforms or different facilities to achieve the same thing that you would achieve, for example, in one platform. In the absence of very robust, very strong internet connectivity, very often we are unable to consistently use the LMS. And that is where very simple things like WhatsApp come in, because then you can send a PDF document, you can send a short clip, you can talk back and forth. Student can ask questions and you can answer in live, in real time, back and forth. And I think these are some of the innovations that come with luck. So yes, luck is a bad thing, but it's also possible to turn it the other side and find innovation and opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Eunice. Natasha, did you want to come in?
Thank you. Yes. I think it's so important what Eunice is saying also in terms of that, and I've said that before, absence does not make the heart grow fonder. It's how do we respond to students? So use technology, use different aspects. Somebody in the chat also referred to Telegram. Now, Telegram actually became an alternative to WhatsApp when WhatsApp changed its policies. And I can already also share with you that Telegram is what UNISA, for example, use for their students. So the lecturers communicate with the students via Telegram. Jakatuli, and if you will allow me, Pauline, just in terms of some of the comments that were also made, and that links to this, is Jakatuli, you referred to phones as well. Research showed that the younger, the born frees in our case, they don't use their phones also optimally, and it's such an effective tool. And if we, for example, Because if you can look at, and I'm going to go back to Eunice with WhatsApp, what you can share on WhatsApp in terms of the links, but you also have to be mindful, because if you have large classes, I've seen where the WhatsApps just get out of control. So I think you should have then clear rules of engagement. And somebody also asked in terms of ICTs and the use of ICTs. You know, at our university, we did borrow students' laptops, and it was sent to them during COVID via courier companies. And then an alternative also to practical, somebody also asked on the group about that, you know, is use, for example, Google's e-portfolios. We have successfully used it. I have successfully used it. Use your cell phones, use alternatives, because remember, it also, the D also stands for distance learning. So what alternatives can we use? What online alternatives are they available? But then it would sometimes also entail a hard copy. And just, Samuel, to get to you, your friend didn't use ClickUp correctly, you know, because UP had a very clear defined strategy. So in terms of really engaging students online, you have to make use of the various tools. You have to, as a lecturer, make use of, for example, discussion forums, blogs. You have to have, if you make use of YouTube, you embed it, not more than 5 minutes, otherwise we this data. And then also, you know, we had to negotiate with cell phone companies also to have lower data costs and to give data to our students. As a UNISA student, we also got free data. So that, and that's what I also want to say, you know, if you can use, it's not just simply putting your lectures online. It's not just online. But ensure that you have, and that's why we have asynchronous and synchronous sessions. And that is what truly blended would be about. So that engaging students in different ways, but still having your online presence. So even if it is then a synchronous session where you then engage with the students, but you need to be mindful in terms of time, because data can be expensive. I just wanted to say that. And in terms of the financing, remember, initial costs, it will be expensive. But if we think of, in the end, you save on travel, you save on, for example, accommodation, it allows people, and this was one of the questions as well, more people access to higher education. And that is what we want, because now a student sitting in, for example, Kenya can study at my university and the other way around. And I think that is the beauty of e-learning, or blended learning in this case also. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Lots, and I like the way you've combined your responses to cover quite a few of the questions in the chat. So that's really helpful. And for those putting questions in, please, if you are directing them to a specific member of the panel or the presenters, please do indicate so I can direct them to the team. But so far, they're all doing a good job anyway in terms of answering broadly, so that helps. So there's some questions coming through that I don't know, but they're focusing on economics. I don't know if any of you panelists or speakers have a particular interest in economics, but they want to know of any sort of online edX, Coursera courses that are available focusing on economics that they might be able to tap into. And if we don't have a response, we don't have one. Okay, Wanjira. Thank you.
I actually don't have a response, but I want to say something anyway. And that's part of, I think, why we are here. So there's many resources that exist out on the web in different institutions, different organizations. But we still have a gap when it comes to our own content. So I think my message here is, how can we then be the developers of our own content? And this is where the movement of openness in creating and sharing comes in handy. Different organizations, edX, Sailor, all these, they usually recruit writers from all over the globe. And I think this is an opportunity for us to then say, there is something, it's very generic, or it's very context based in a particular part of the world. How can we then start to create that? And I've seen some areas of success, with some of the OER repositories. So I think that to us is a message. Where do we publish? How do we provide opportunities for that? When we open classes, who are we opening them up to? Because we were just talking about MOOCs a little while ago. With that in mind, I think we also then start to create our own solutions to our challenges. I don't feel there's anything particularly wrong with borrowing what already exists, depending on the terms of use. But using those ideas to then reinvent and create that to be our own, I think, is what many institutions are doing, including different open universities around the continent and also around the globe. Then there's also, consortiums that are already doing that. So like Commonwealth of Learning might have something, somebody can reach out to them and say, we don't have this, can you help us find something? And sometimes they have an answer, sometimes they might go find the answer for you and then come back and give you that response.
Thank you, Wanjira. So somewhat, David Boche, I hope that helps, even though we couldn't specifically answer your question. So there's an interesting comment from someone in George. I hope I pronounced your name adequately. So he's mentioning the fact that sometimes the lecturers are resisting moving into new forms of teaching, and so that attitude doesn't help move us in the right direction or at the speed that is needed. So he's asking what can be done to change the situation. So I guess panelists and presenters, what do you think we can do to motivate those who are not marching along as briskly as we would like them to, please? Any takers?
Okay.
Wanjira?
Okay, if I can go? Okay, sorry.
Wanjira's hand shot up first. I'll come to you next.
Okay.
Samuel. Yes, please, Wanjira.
Okay, so thanks, Sam. Yeah, sorry, I jumped ahead of you, but it's just something that popped in my mind as Sam was speaking, which has to do with what we call championing, selecting. Not everybody will go for it, and there'll always be somebody who will not pick up. I think, Sam, at the beginning you mentioned about laggards and the diffusion of innovation.
Yeah.
We'll always have that. There's a bell curve that shows where we all fall, and we don't always have to pick something and run with it. Sometimes we wait to see how it's being done. You build confidence. You show others that it is possible, it's doable. And I think with that in mind, that's a step. And I've seen institutions through different initiatives doing that. They'll go to a university and find maybe there's 500 lecturers. Who are the 10 most likely to move all the way from the beginning to the end? And then they use that opportunity to then demonstrate to the others that this is doable, this is possible. I think after the pandemic, I think it was an opportunity for us to identify some of those. And I think many of those from different institutions have actually progressed very well. And I think they have provided their colleagues with ways of saying, this is how I've done it, can I tap into it? And I think also we sometimes think of professional development as an event. I think it's something that should be ongoing. So it's not a one-off. It's something you continuously provide, continuously present, such that as new information comes in or new opportunities for looking at things differently, you see who can be plugged where. And that, I think, starts to build the confidence and the capacity as well.
Thank you very much. I hope institutional leaders are listening and can tap into some of the recommendations coming through. Samuel, please go.
Yes. All right. Thank you. So one thing we need to understand, I think Wanjira just said that right. Change has almost always been resisted. So if you trace back the history of distance education, it didn't come easy. And eventually those against distance education, one of the key points they were using against it is that there is a geographical distance, is faceless and all that. Now, Odell, which UNISA is in the lead. Anyway, I'm a student of UNISA and I still have very close ties with them, so I know what's happening there. They are in the lead. They have used technology, they have used social media, they have used all sorts of means and models to bridge that gap, pedagogical and geographical gap. Yet, people still resist whatever, I don't know, but people still resist the implementation of Odell and all that. But this is where leadership comes in. My question, I was just pondering over this when Nigeria was speaking and when you were asking the question, how come COVID came? You know, when COVID came, you and I are witnesses. It is not an African pandemic. So we waited for it to come to Africa before we acted. While we could have taken lessons from what was happening elsewhere, that even if COVID is not an African pandemic, any other pandemic can emerge from Africa. And so in the eventuality that happens, how do we continue with learning? Now, I believe because many people were virtually forced to move online during the pandemic, they have relented. It's only those who saw the need and who came to appreciate it who are still perpetuating the e-learning. And so my point here is that there comes a time where you lead, you need to be a leader and not a manager, where you drive people. Now we needed to innovate the system. What awareness was creating? Management of institutions think, oh, we have the wherewithal, we have the power. Let's just announce and people should comply. But this is where we need leadership, transparency, awareness, continuous training. When was the last time institutions trained their lecturers to still continue with online skills and teaching in an ODEL environment? We have forgotten everything, as if nothing may happen again, but we are not guaranteed of that. So I'm saying let's keep creating awareness, not just of a pandemic, but of digital technologies, of their usages, even in face-to-face environments. Let's create awareness. We are doing a paper, and ask yourself how many African faculty are aware of ChatGPT and what it is doing in the educational ecosystem. Awareness is so low. So as leadership, we need to create awareness, we need to persuade, we need to provide the environment. How many of us, how many institutions in Africa can get 50% of what UP or UNISA has? I was once upon a time a lecturer in a small college in South Africa. I became the head of department, and there was nothing like challenges with the gadgets that I needed to work. Is that the case everywhere? These are things that questions we need to think about if we want to sustain and improve upon teaching and learning in ODEL environments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samuel. I think you're very well placed to champion this sort of encouraging researchers and lecturers into using these systems, not just at the University of Ghana, but further afield. So maybe we should task you with also setting up a community of practice to get this going, to compel people to move along. Thank you very much for your response. Hopefully that is going to encourage Samuel in Njoroge who asked that question, that there is hope, there's light at the end of the tunnel. To bring in a different element, the policy side. So for example, Albert Lusawata is asking about the need to motivate people to keep going with these kind of new approaches to teaching and learning, because unless there's sort of some kind of enforcement or there's a policy to move these institutions to keep going, things will go back to the old ways, as Edwin also mentioned in his presentation, that some institutions are just falling back. So I guess looking at policies, what kind of policies do we need to set within the institutions, but also thinking about our African governments, what do we need to actually motivate and enforce these kind of new ways of teaching and learning that could be beneficial to our institutions? Again, any takers on that, the policy aspect? Thank you. Actually, we haven't heard from Edwin at all. Edwin, do you have any thoughts on the policy side of it, given what PASGR does and also the pedal initiative that you talked to us about?
Thank you very much, Pauline. So our interventions, I wish Monica, who was initially planned to be part of this webinar, was here. In our intervention, how we had designed it at the impact level of implementation, we're hoping that to have influence, policy influence in at two levels: the universities that we are collaborating with, and at the national level with the commissions of university education in the different countries that we had found made some should I say, created an entry point. So at the university level, I should say we've seen some universities that have taken up pedagogical changes and even institutionalize for example, in what I was showing, we have universities that have come into, should I say, a memorandum of understanding with the PASGR to take up our modules. I would like to highlight the case of University of Ghana that already had a center for, I don't know if I'm getting this right, the Center for Teaching Excellence or something to that effect. And I know we were sort of like borrowing from each other, and perhaps quite a bit from PEDO was adapted in the setting up of that center. So the other thing that we put effort in was, again, getting commissions for university education to endorse online teaching and learning through PEDO as an entry point, because we also try to design it along UNESCO's, should I say, quality standards. So we've had sort of like a hit and miss at the policy level, especially at the national and even regional level. But the institutional level, we've enjoyed quite a bit of uptake. And the challenge will be often some of these processes need quite a bit of investing in relationships and also buying from policymakers in these spaces. And that's something we're still trying to grapple around and figure out how to design programming around. Yep.
Thank you so much, Edwin. Before no, don't go up. Because there's another question for you, or that you've offered to respond to. So Shamim Nassar was asking about the differences in terms of ability to respond to teaching and learning by subject area. So he's mentioning the fact that the humanities and social sciences may have different experiences to the STEM, and that relates to what Wanjira was saying earlier as well in terms of resource availability. So do you want to try and give a response to that one?
Sure. That's a very good question. And indeed, there are, should I say, challenges. So again, with PEDO, when we initially launched it in 2018, it was essentially designed for teaching and learning, blended teaching and learning for social sciences. And with time, there was so much buy-in from even non-social science programs. For example, I can give you the example of University of Ibadan, which for the most part is a STEM university. We had quite a number of people showing interest in what we're doing. So I think the magic and the trick in making it work, and not necessarily just for PEDO, but generally blended teaching and learning, is, should I say, tweaking or creating an ecosystem that adapts to that which you want to deliver. We have, for example, one of our champions, I don't know if they joined in this webinar. His name is Jared Ongaro. He's a lecturer, a mathematics lecturer at University of Nairobi, and he's done quite well as far as designing, facilitating, and even evaluating students entirely online. And he has been at the very forefront of, should I say, that system change at the University of Nairobi as far as online teaching and learning is concerned. So the long and short is that indeed, we cannot just take wholesale learning designs and adopt them into spaces that we need to figure out how well they fit with learning outcomes that we intend to achieve in our processes. So yeah, that's what I would love to say about that.
Okay, thank you very much. Samuel, there's a comeback question for you. So Dr. John Agberagba is asking that the same way you responded about motivating teachers and supporting them to adapt or to adjust to online teaching and learning, what provision do you think can be made for students who resist moving into that sphere as well? And if you have any suggestions. And others may also think about responses to add to Samuel's if they have any.
All
the
right,
students.
Thank you so much. The students can resist or may resist because there is a lack of policy framework to guide teaching and learning in the institution. If the students get an admission letter and it is stipulated that teaching is by this mode, then they don't have a choice. They can opt for other universities. So as head of distance education for the past 2 years or so, we inserted that in the students' admission letter, because we moved online and they wanted to by compulsion have exams also online. But the university policy states that the mode of exams is at the discretion of the examiner. So some will do online, some will do offline, whatever it takes, sit in. We don't influence that. But that one has been on the quiet for a while. But because universities don't stipulate in the policy, and with COVID somehow impelled us to switch between whatever most students are able to have the leverage to do what they want to do. And when it comes to motivation, of course, students have gone through pre-tertiary all their lives face-to-face. Now they come to universities and then you want them to do hybrid or online. The question goes back to access to digital gadgets. I mentioned the dire situation that Mohammed painted, that we still have students in tertiary institutions who don't, the family, the household cannot afford a radio set. How much more do they? So yes, UNISA as a student, even if you don't get bursary, that's opportunity to work at the university, work with companies that can give you a digital gadget, laptop, phone, whatever, that you pay in installment. We don't have that facility. When it was COVID, University of Ghana worked with MTN and Vodafone, the two telco giants in Ghana, and they give data to both faculty and students for 3 months. Apart from that, every activity on the Sakai Learning Management System was 0 rated. So we didn't have complaints about data. That phase is gone 2 years down the line. So if we really want to motivate students, train students who will fit into this competitive labor market after school, then we need to bring back those motivations. We need to work hand in hand with industry players. One of the focal points of our Vice Chancellor's agenda is one student, one laptop. So she's worked with industries, University Teachers Association of Ghana, University of Ghana branch. We've done donations, but as at the last congregation 2 weeks ago, she had been able to secure 248 laptops, and 120 had been distributed. But I'm talking of a university with almost 60,000 undergraduate students. Assuming 80% can comfortably afford digital gadgets, the 20% far outweighs the 248 that we have secured. And therefore, there needs to be a concerted effort between government, between industry, between NGOs and the university authorities to be able to secure all these gadgets to make learning more meaningful and provide a comfortable learning environment for these dear students. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Natasha. And also, before Natasha comes in, I've seen that Dr. John would like to make a comment. And so let's take Natasha's response and then we go to Dr. John. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. So I just want to mention that, yes, we will have resistant lecturers, but I think if they see the benefits, you need to showcase what you are doing. The same applies to students. In all of this, we want students that are more employable, so better employable, so graduates that are more employable, but then also that they are self-employable. Now, I've worked and I'm still working in terms of the future of work. And you could share this with the students because they can't stay behind, because in terms of, for example, some of the most critical skills for the future of work would be, for example, learning agility, a growth mindset, adaptability, also cultural adaptability, virtual collaboration. So you can see that there is a very strong E component to skills that will be required in terms of the future of work. And I think that is also where aspects such as artificial intelligence come in. Samuel, you referred to Chat GPT. So we now use Chat GPT because it's going to be a problem. But we now say to the students, okay, use Chat GPT to do a literary where it was plagiarism. And so, by the way, I've tested it. It doesn't plagiarize. Chat GPT does not plagiarize for some reason. So, use then what we fear, because we are fearful of what we don't know. Is what we resist change. So let's use that then and see how we can incorporate it. But I think in terms of especially students for their future, they need to understand that there are certain skills that is also learned within an online environment that is critical. And I think we have a 90-second generation. TikTok has made people 90 seconds. They have 90 seconds of an attention span. If we don't tap into that 90 seconds immediately, we will lose students. So just my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. I see someone wants to jump in before I bring Dr. John. Okay.
Very basic. These are very basic. I mean, Natasha has given us a beautiful, broader picture, but basic things. We can't move students online and do the things in the same old way. We can't use the same pedagogical strategies we use in the old environment to teach students for them to make meaning out of it. Number two, we can't assess students the same way we used to assess them. So, I mean, my PhD students last semester, they didn't have any written exams, more of presentations, more of field work. At the end of the day, whatever was left, do a reflective portfolio. So students will find sense in where we are moving them. Because what's the sense of transitioning from one space to the other while you do things the same way? And even in the same old way, they could see you, they could feel your presence. Here they don't. You come and talk for 2 hours and they are gone. So these are also basics that we need to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots more points for reflection. How do we continue to do the best we can, but also innovate and adapt as we move forward into this fourth era, the technology era? Lots for us to think about. Is Dr. John able to make his comment now before we move on to something else? We only have a few minutes left. Krista, does Dr. John have access to be able to speak?
Yes, you should. Let me just check this again really quickly. I don't know if you want to move on to another question while we
okay.
His microphone is on.
Yeah. Dr. John, are you still with us? Otherwise, I'll move on to another question. Okay, so there was a bit coming through already through Sam's response about the role that, say, technology, telecoms providers had to play during the pandemic to be able to support some of our students and lecturers to be able to have the facilities and the resources to go online. I'm wondering, from the panel generally and the speakers, what role do you think employers or industry can play in this situation to help us as universities, as students, lecturers, to be able to function more in terms of resources? So yeah, industry, employers, but also thinking more broadly about funders, because universities will always tell you they need more support to be able to do things. So any thoughts or suggestions on how funders and also industry can play a role in this capacity strengthening element? Who wants to have a go? Okay, Wanjira.
Thanks, Pauline. So I think one of the things we need to factor is the structure of the partnerships and what the expectations are from both sides. And I think many funders, not just in education, but in many sectors, health included, seek to work with institutions and organizations that have a self-financing, funding model, something that moves beyond when the funding cycle ends. So how do you generate revenue to keep the programs going, I think is one thing. One thing I've seen different institutions do on that end, with support of different players, is when you're offering a program, what else are you doing for some, maybe a degree program? What else is available for somebody who just needs a short course, 10 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever length of time, in a very specific particular area, and that's funded differently. So those are the kinds of additional ways of bringing in the revenue. I've also seen other institutions that motivate instructors to develop courses to teach, and then they get a percentage of whatever number of students enrolled. So those models, I think, help us think about reducing a dependency of sorts, but at the same time, it helps us think about it's not a one-way or unidirectional approach to funding. So from that perspective, that works quite well. From the industry perspective, many tech companies also think about the long-term sustainability of what happens when a student graduates. So we've all seen software companies come and bring in software, it's provided for free. So that reduces the cost for the institution and the students. But guess what? We all get hooked on using them. You've got all your files saved in one format, means even after you graduate or you move for maybe to a new position, working or whatever else you're doing, you're still using the resources. So that interdependency, I think, is one way to really think about the funding and the continuity of how programs exist and continue to exist.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Wanjira. I see Eunice has her hand up as well.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. Yeah, beyond funding and what Wanjira has said, I think we are getting into an era where we need to begin co-producing with the industry. We in the academy, we in the universities, we need to think of industry as people with whom we can co-design, co-implement, and even co-assess curricula. Why? Because these people in the industry are often far much better than us in terms of skills, especially, particularly when you're talking about skills that are context-based. Because it's one thing to have skills, it's another thing to apply those skills in specific context. People who have been in the industry for some time, they've done this and that, are very well informed and could actually be filling the gaps where we in the academy may be having gaps. And it's the same thing even with community. We need to be listening to community and engaging them more in co-designing, facilitation or co-implementation of curricula, and even in co-assessment. We just don't want to think that the traditional situation of paper certification is adequate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear the different contributions coming through. And again, hopefully this is all helping to bring together these learning and sharing suggestions that this webinar is about. Hopefully lots of food for thought for individuals and institutions to go away with. I understand Monica Chibita has a contribution to make. So if we could give her access to the microphone, she could come in if she's ready.
I'm ready. I was just figuring out how to get one. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Monica Chibita from Uganda Christian University. I'm a graduate of PEDO. And I've been very, very fascinated by the discussion this afternoon. I just have a brief comment and then a very brief follow-up on something I asked earlier. The brief comment is on the last idea that was just shared on co-doing things, co-designing and co-implementing and co-assessing. I think that's a wonderful idea. The industry in Uganda is constantly asking how they can come on board. But behind that asking is often an expectation that they will be compensated for their time. And the flexibility to do that does not really exist within a lot of the universities. So I think there would need to be some changes at the policy level to be able to accommodate that, otherwise very good idea. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the issue of assessment. There's a debate going on right now in our university about, we are trying to go as hybrid as possible, but the issue of assessment is a challenge because there is a fear that if you give people, continue to give people take-home exams or take-home papers and all, with the amount of freedom they have with the internet and everything, you will not know who is doing the work and who has the work being done for them and so on. And so we should pivot more towards face-to-face or tests instead of essays and other types of assignments, takeaway essays. I wonder if people, and somebody has responded to this, it's about innovative assessment, but would you unpack that for us a little bit in your experience? How have you been able to overcome this? Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. So back to the issue of confidence. Anyone want to respond to that at this point? Okay, it's clearly a matter of interest. Samuel, where are you coming?
Yeah, if I can go. Yeah, assessment has become a big issue, not only on the continent of Africa. When ChatGPT came, if you read, writings from global perspectives, universities everywhere were thinking, are we going to go back to sitting exams and all that? But fortunately, we can pick example from Africa again. UNISA has moved online. They do assessment online. And I saw somebody post, there are softwares for monitoring students' exams, procuring devices, which I wanted to bring here. But again, the challenge, reason why I've not been able to do it for the past 2 years is that not every student has been able to afford a laptop with a camera. So I'm holding back a bit. Again, alternative forms of assessment. I use sometimes, one aspect of my continuous assessment is multiple choice questions. Now, how do I do this? If I want students to answer 20 questions, I put in 150 questions. I give them 2 chances. I give them 22 minutes, 2 minutes extra for technical hitches and all that. You still have 2 chances, and it comes at random. So there is a story I normally share. There was a time 400 students were sitting right in front of my office with their friends around. I was moving in and out, and at a point they got frustrated. One of them said, sir, the questions are not the same. I just looked at them and I laughed. So even test as multiple choice questions is difficult to set, but I have my question bank, 500 questions per course. So once I want to give 30 questions, I put in about 150 questions. You can sit together. If you want to cheat, you can cheat, but you can never finish. So it's up to you to either cheat and go halfway or not. Now, I use discussion forums, but I normally do that for only graduate students because, here we have a lot of students. And I don't do that for undergrad, unless it's an elective course and they are less than 10. You have discussion forums. If you want somebody to do your discussion forum for you online, you still have to tell the person what to do. So what's the point? I give students a management. I make them go to, what do you call it? Organizations and profile certain things for me. And as I said, exams, I don't need to see you. Do a reflective portfolio. The reflective portfolio takes you from the beginning of the course to then with your own recommendations. So you can pay somebody to do for you, but you have to sit with that person to coach that person. The only challenge in doing all these things is the huge number of students that we have in our continent. If not, there are ways we can do this and they will still meet quality assurance.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Regrettably, it's been a fascinating discussion and I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot, but our time has come to an end. I mean, there are more questions, there are lots of supportive comments, thanking you all for the engaging discussion, and we appreciate those who put questions and comments in the chat, but our time has come to an end and I do have to wrap things up here, but I hope everybody has found it to be of some use. And I have the privilege, it doesn't happen often, but yeah, I have the privilege of handing over to another Pauline. So you get 2 of us in one webinar session. So I'll hand over now to Dr. Pauline Ngimwa from PASGR. She's the Acting Executive Director at the moment, and she will close us out But I appreciate all your contributions, panelists and speakers. And yes, over to you now, Pauline. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it doesn't always happen, Pauline, to hand over the mic to another Pauline. But it's been a privilege for me to take a back seat and listen. A privilege in the sense that I am deeply invested in educational technology. I'm a student of educational technology. I'm a researcher of educational technology. And I am also an enthusiast follower of what has been happening. So just taking a backseat to listen, to learn, has really been a privilege. And I've been asked to give concluding remarks. And that's exactly what I'll do, because I'm looking at the time and I can see that time has really moved. So I'll try as much as possible to be brief. But I want to preface my remarks by stating that when PASGR conceived PEDO, this was about 1 or 2 years before COVID struck. And what we had in mind was to catalyze a systemic change in teaching and learning in our universities, having observed that not all our educators possessed pedagogical skills. And this was alluded to by Edwin, where he said that you could have somebody who is very well conversant with his area or her area of discipline, but when it comes to teaching, doesn't have the right pedagogical skills. And that is why PEDO came on board. We aimed to create a critical mass of educators with those skills. And as you heard from Professor Kamara, by the time COVID was hitting, we already had succeeded in developing pedagogical champions. Eunice and many more, including our panelists, to some of our panelists today, are our champions, and we have a lot more spread across the continent. We were happy that we did have champions who could work with our educators, with the rest of the educators, to try and fill a need that came with a sudden shift to online that was experienced, as we have heard. But for me, I think having listened to what has been communicated and discussed and shared today, a question is in my mind. What are the lessons that we are learning? And like I've said, when COVID struck, some of us who have been in this space of e-learning, we started getting a bit of excitement, because things that we had observed and even struggled with moving or getting our universities adopt technology, we found that gradually this was being adopted, it was being accepted, and with, of course, initial resistance. But we started seeing that, yes, even those professors who are not really keen on that, they're being forced to get there, to get to that space. And for me, and a lot more, we were starting to get excited. But the rate of adoption have started retrogressing, and we have seen that. And we are going back to our old ways of doing things. And this is worrying. In my hope, I thought that this sudden shift to e-learning was the beginning of greater things. But what we are seeing, that is not what is happening. What we know is that people who've studied adoption of technology have also seen, and that has started emerging in today's discussion, I've started seeing that when there are shocks like the pandemic, like fees must fall, and other similar shocks, then people are forced to adopt the technology, whether that is a good way of doing things or not, but we see that adoption. But now where we are right now, instead of advancing with that adoption, we're starting to see that retrogression. That is worrying. So when ESSA and PASGR conceived this series of webinars, we had hoped that we would come, learn lessons, share experiences, and then move forward. And my hope is that having listened to what has been coming out, we will take the lessons and we will see what is it that we want to do. And Wanjira started us thinking when she talked about the columns, you know, the 3 columns. I think we need to develop those columns and fill in what did we do well, what needs to be done, and where do we move from. And I was speaking a few things, and for me, what was starting to emerge was how we nurture champions. And we've seen what champions have done. How do we nurture more of those champions in this adoption, in the technology adoption, this e-learning? Something else that is also at the heart of the kind of work that interests me in my research interest is how do we create Africa-specific content? And I was starting to get excited when new ideas were coming up. How do we co-create content with our own students? How do we co-create content with the industry? How do we co-create content with the community? Things for us to ponder on. How about the emerging technologies? AI is already here. I tell you, when you get to ChatGPT, you get excited, but you also get worried. What are the implications of these emerging technologies for higher education? Issues of accessibility. I think Samuel really put it quite well, black and white. We need to do work around accessibility. It has always been an issue. I studied in one of the open universities, and accessibility is something that is highly, focused upon. So we as African educators, what do we need to do in matters accessibility? How about inclusivity? The issue of assessment is a hot potato. What do we do with that? And I like also suggestions that were coming on board. Samuel, I like your suggestion about, your example about e-portfolios for your PhD students, and a lot more innovative assessment practices that we need to look at. About the cultural issues, I've had it even in our previous webinar. This came up very strongly about how our female students were forced to step aside and do other things that are culturally accepted at the expense of their learning when it came to e-learning, about use of technologies for female students within different communities. We as researchers, the field is so wide. We need to identify where more knowledge is needed. Those issues that came up, people assessments, use of emerging technologies, etc. We need to look at where knowledge is needed. And as we say that, we also look at policy. There was a question that was asked to my colleague, Edwin. PASGR has invested so much in policy engaged research. And we just concluded a research. In our last webinar, we shared a bit of what is emerging. This is a big project that has now concluded, and one aspect of it was policy recommendations in 3 areas: equitable access to education during COVID, opportunities for PPP, public-private partnerships, and of course, the future of postgraduate study, which again was adversely affected. I could go on and on in terms of policy and practice and what kind of knowledge we need to develop to support these areas. So as educators, what do we need? How do we move from here? What kind of knowledge do we need to generate? And what kind of practices do we need to change? I think for me, that is the kind of message that was coming up. Time is not on our side. I think I want now to conclude. And as I draw these remarks to a conclusion, allow me to just acknowledge every one of you. Really appreciate your time. Most of you have kept coming back for our webinars, and that means that there's still so much to learn and share. This is our space. I want to appreciate your time. I want to appreciate the generosity that you have shown in sharing your experiences, asking questions. That's the only way we learn from each other. I'd like to thank our dear panelists and our presenters. Thank you very much for taking time, for being very generous with your information and with your knowledge. Thank you, Pauline, my namesake, our very able moderator. I thank you very much for taking us through a very animated discussion. And of course, we have a very able organizing team in the background led by Christy, Edwin, and everybody else who's been there making this possible. We continue appreciating our partnership with ESSA on behalf of PASGR. We really appreciate this budding partnership with ESSA. And obviously, we were not wrong. I think the conversation needs to continue, and we look forward to more engagement. I had been asked by the organizers to request participants to get to the chat and respond to an evaluation. Kindly do so. So with that, thank you very much. I hand this back to Christy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and thank you everybody else. It indeed has been a very exciting and a very engaging webinar today. We look forward to seeing you all again in our next one in a few months' time. But thank you so much. If I could just ask the panelists and the presenters to stay behind. But thank you everybody else, and see you again soon. Bye-bye. Let's see if people are dropping off. Okay. Okay, there's still some hands being raised. But Pauline, did you want to say something? I could see that you were okay. You're on mute, so I can't.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to say thank you all so much. Just to appreciate the panelists and the speakers and the organizers for all the hard work, and I hope you all enjoyed it. And I know there will be a short blog prepared